Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to Living in the Solution with Dr. Elena George. Today we have a repeat guest, somebody who I really enjoyed speaking with on his last show. We talked about the economy, and I think another timely thing that needs to be addressed, which is being bandied about as if it's basically the gospel. It's about diversity and what that really means. We have entered somewhere that I don't think anybody realized where it was going to take us. I think people need to make some decisions about whether they want to go down a path that alienates us, that divides and conquers, and doesn't serve anybody. So today we're going to speak with Mr. John Green. He's a political refugee from Minnesota, now residing in Free, Idaho. He's a graduate of Purdue University, and he spent 40 years doing product development, quality assurance, and strategic planning in the fields of railroad maintenance, oil exploration, and defense systems for the Army and Navy. He's now retired and spends his time writing social and political commentary. He's written for such outlets as The American Thinker, the Blue State Conservative, and the American Free News Network. And Mr. Green, I want to again thank you for joining me, because last time I think we had an important show and it was more thinking and information than heat. And I think this conversation, I'm sure, is going to be the same way, because it's such an emotional topic. It seems to me that it's new, but from reading your article, The Diversity Industry Has Turned the Clock Back to 1960, it seems that this diversity mindset is not new.
No, it's really not. It's kind of important to know, everybody's heard the terminology valuing diversity. It's probably important to know where that started. Back in the 1960s, when we were all talking about desegregation, the whole valuing diversity concept began to be discussed at various universities. But then it kind of exploded into the industrial world in the 1980s, and companies began embracing the notion as a way to avoid discrimination lawsuits. And what happened as a result of that is that a whole valuing diversity industry was spawned, and we got on this path of valuing our differences, and we never understood where that was going to take us long term. And now here we are 40 years later, and I think we can start to see what the fruits of that philosophy actually are.
When you say valuing our differences, it doesn't seem, the way it's been put out there, that it is valuing our differences. It's somebody did something to somebody, and somebody's a victim. If you value yourself, how can you possibly be a victim?
Well, that's part of the whole intersectionality philosophy, and that was of course, a natural outcome of the diversity concept. When the very words valuing diversity are really saying we're placing value on our differences. We're saying that our differences are of greater value to society than our commonalities. So we're looking at everything through a lens of what is a person's race, what is their ethnicity, what's their gender, what's their socioeconomic status, what's their sexual orientation. And we've gotten to the point now where the valuing diversity industry is encouraging us to look at everybody in those terms. That inevitably resulted in this whole thing we call the intersectionality philosophy, which is, let's look at all of these different categorizations of human beings and see how they intersect. And we end up looking at people through this kind of Venn diagram lens and assessing what their relative victimhood is based upon the number of intersections. And then we assess the amount of societal benefit that they should accrue because of that. And it has not torn down walls and made us a closer people. It has actually done the opposite. It's built walls and driven us apart.
This is all about language, and using language, in my opinion, as a weapon. When you talk about intersectionality, wouldn't you actually, if you were to take it to its logical extent, it's what brings us together. It's what the intersection where everybody meets, right? How do they use that language to mean the absolute opposite?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. If we look at the places where we meet, that's talking about our commonalities. That's our shared humanity. And if we were to focus on those things, we would have much fewer problems right now. But when we're talking about intersectionality from the perspective of the diversity industry, what we're talking about is the differences in ethnicity, race, financial standing, sexual orientation, gender, those things. And in fact, the actual definition of intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given group or individual, creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. So, what they're actually focusing on are not the connections of commonality we have, but the connections of victimhood that we have, which drives us in a completely different direction than focusing on what our shared human characteristics are. If we focused on our shared human characteristics, we would be more interested in things like, the moral character of people. People work hard. Do they contribute to their communities? Do they take care of their families? Those are the things that we would place high value on. But when we have our intersectionality discussion, none of those things are ever mentioned.
So from what you're saying, the way I take this is the actual opposite of a melting pot. I mean, growing up, that was the thing that we really hung our hat on. We're all Americans. We're all coming from different locations. I went to a school, an extremely small school, and we had so many different ethnic groups, races in our class, but we were together. And it was what made us different. And we actually highlighted that in a good way, that we were all Americans and we had something to bring to the table. So with melting pot versus diversity, it seems like it's the actual opposite from what you just described there, how they categorize it.
I believe it actually is. And that's very unfortunate because my experience growing up sounds very similar to yours. We referred to America as the great melting pot, and that was something we were proud of. And we thought that was something that there should be more of. Well, that implies assimilation and integration, which are dirty words in the diversity industry. I actually have a personal experience that illustrates this. Earlier in my life, I was an engineering manager at a large defense company, and we had a diversity program at the company to promote equal opportunity for people from different races, ethnicities, gender biases, different things like that. We wanted to make our place of work open and inviting to everybody. But as soon as we kicked off the diversity program and had some consultants in to help guide us, it turned into something very different. At one point, there was the program was being administered by what was called the Diversity Council. And the Diversity Council asked the company president to assign a high-level executive to give them some clout. So the company president assigned my boss, who is a fellow named Bob Sanchez. And Bob was a vice president. He was of Latino descent, and he was an ex-admiral in the U.S. Navy. So they decided, well, Bob would be the perfect guy to provide some clout to the Diversity Council. And they sent him to the first meeting. He took me along with him because, every admiral needs a few aides in tow whenever they go anywhere. And the Diversity Council started talking about all the things they were going to do to make it an open and welcoming environment for all of these different categorizations of human beings. At the very end of the meeting, Bob said, the real key is assimilation. And that's when the Diversity Council contacted the company president and said, we don't need Bob's services anymore. And he was disinvited from ever attending another meeting. So the very notion of assimilation, which is another word for melting pot, is a dirty word for the diversity industry. That is not what they're after. They are after maintaining our differences.
That's so tragic. On that note, let's take our first break because
Sure.
I think you set the table for what they're saying and what actually they're trying to accomplish. So let's take our first break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Mr. John Green, and we're speaking about diversity, whether that's race, sex, class, you name it. It's just become a weapon that's causing us to look at each other as the other and having people work against their own interest, honestly. In your article, you mentioned something about the title, Going Back in Time. And I remember when I was in college, it was all about everybody commingling. You didn't hang out with just who you looked like. You hung out with people who had your same interests. What color they were didn't matter.
Right.
Now we're having people going into single race dorms, single sex dorms, single race tables. Is this not segregation 2.0?
Oh, absolutely. And isn't it alarming that 40 years after we embraced the whole diversity industry, we've gone back to something that looks alarmingly like 1950s segregation. And we're doing it to ourselves and
Mhm.
treating it like it's a good thing. Now all of a sudden, the world looks just like men with, small minds and evil hearts wanted it to look in the 1960s, but we're treating it as if it's a good thing for racial relations in this country, and it simply cannot be.
You know, it's so self-defeating because I'm seeing it on both sides. When you watch or listen to people in college, some of them, you have the 1%, whether you're black, white, green, you are 1%, you're in the higher education system, right? Claiming that nothing's changed, that it's, it's the worst place in the world. And not only the black students or students uh, of color or whatever, minority students, it's also the white students buying into this, which means you're being held out as the perpetrator and you're buying into it when you had nothing to do with it. Nor are you in the position where you are locked out of society and you're literally a slave. It's like history doesn't matter in this system.
Granted, and it's dangerous when it's embraced by any race within the country, because if we subscribe to this notion that there's this hierarchical ranking of victims that need our protection, is that not at the same time subscribing to the notion that some people are inherently inferior to others? How
Oh,
does promoting that philosophy do anything to benefit our society? Are we teaching people that segregation is a bad thing, that coming together is much better for our society? Or for that matter, are we teaching young children that they're perfectly capable of standing on their own 2 feet and accomplishing whatever they want to? Are we building a sense of self-determination in our children, or are we leaving them with the belief that hard work is not going to be rewarded and hard work is just a sucker's play?
or worse yet, that it's racist. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what it's come
Oh
down
yeah.
to. If merit is racism, working hard and playing the game the right way, not cheating, is racism. And we're old enough to know what came before, but I really worry about the next generation, the children in grade school, the kindergartners who are put in the system where they're locked in with people who are putting them in valued. They're valuing them arbitrarily. They're confusing them in terms of what sex they are, or even if they're human. I mean, there's stories out there of people having litter boxes in the classroom because kids think they're cats. I mean, this is such an emotional, it's devastating. I mean, where are the parents with this that they let this go on? I understand everybody's working, but this is your responsibility. You
Yes.
have a child. I know it sounds really weird, right? What, what are the parents doing? How do you allow your child to be abused, really? I mean, they don't
Oh, it
know who they
is.
are.
Yeah, it's child abuse. No two ways around it. And all I can say is I think the good news is that parents are waking up. There is an awful lot that happened in our school systems for several decades that parents weren't aware of because the school system was just sort of this black box. Nobody knew what happened inside there. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden parents were sitting right next to their kids while they were doing remote learning, and they discovered what lessons their kids were learning, and they were shocked, which explains why last year there was suddenly a huge outcry nationwide against the teaching of critical race theory and things of that nature. So I believe parents are waking up, but there's been incredible damage done for probably a couple of generations in our school systems.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I mean, if you want to take out the superimposed things like critical race theory, etc., the learning process has been completely devastated. Socialization is gone. These children don't know how to interact with people. They're afraid of people if they take their mask off. I mean, all of these things that we really, I don't think, well, I don't know, maybe someone did think about it and didn't care and wanted this to happen. Because when you are in this fight or flight mode, you're completely controllable and you're completely at the mercy of language. Because if someone's going to say something to you to make you feel better or protect you, you're going to run to that, won't you?
Oh, absolutely. And I've had a nagging suspicion for the last couple of years that the mask mandates were never about controlling the spread of the virus. They were always about an outward demonstration of our obedience to the command structure of our country.
I think there's something to that. I mean, there's so many, well, the Stanford experiment comes to mind where those in power really went to the 10th degree with it, with control and manipulation. And whether it was valuable or not, there was some degree of glee, I think, that somebody could lord it over a
Yeah.
parent, remove a student, damage somebody's life, somebody's credibility, somebody's psyche, and
Oh,
with impunity.
absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
there was no consequence for this.
Just look at the things that we implemented as under the objective of controlling the spread of the virus. We said that we needed to implement curfews. So you couldn't go out after 9 o'clock at night because how does that stop the spread of the virus? I guess they don't. I guess they don't come out until after dark. So curfews should help. We had one governor that implemented an order that it was okay to do recreation on the state's lakes in unpowered boats, but powered boats were not acceptable. And that was
Except
all done in the name of controlling the virus. Tell
Wait a
me
second,
there was,
except for her husband. So it
huh?
wasn't everybody. Some people were more equal than others, like her husband. I
Oh
remember
yeah,
he got that.
yeah, absolutely. But what I mean is there was just such runaway tyranny that it was obvious that they were trying to flex their muscles to see how much they could get away with. It had nothing to do with controlling the spread of the virus.
I think there's a lot of that going on and still going on to this day. I know we're going to take a break in a few minutes, but I want to start the conversation about these corporate ties to this diversity. I
Okay.
mean, I don't think a majority of the country is in line with this. But what do the corporations stand to gain? I'm thinking of Disney and all these other places. As soon as they do some woke stuff, people walk away. They stop seeing the movies. They stop going to the parks. I mean, there's consequences, I think.
Hmm.
What's their end game? Because they're losing money and losing market share because of it, are they not? Look at CNN and the rest of this group.
Hugely. Yeah, they're losing tons of money. They're losing customers, and they'll eventually put themselves out of business if they don't stop.
What's the end game then?
I don't know. We'll find out. The reality is that the whole diversity industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. It's a network of consultants, trainers, publishers, speakers, and I saw on Fox News about a month ago that it's an $8 billion industry now. So it's big money. And what that means is there's lots of money available as long as they can keep each other keep us all at each other's throats. And that seems
You're
to be what they're doing.
I mean, it's always something that's adversarial on all fronts, whether it's your children, your job, social media. You can never really take a step back and just exhale because something's always going on. Some innocent statement gets blown up out of proportion. And then you're right, they seem to have a whole group of people or entities that descend to try to force the narrative. But it's so over the top now. Are people really listening? Are they really paying attention? I mean, we're looking at the pocketbooks, follow the money. People stop shopping at these places, stop buying their products. At some point, doesn't this pendulum, doesn't it have to swing the opposite way?
Yeah, I'm a believer in capitalism, and capitalism's going to fix it eventually. It might take time, and there'll be a lot of pain involved. But you brought up the case of Disney going woke. Well, what happened when they did that? Their ticket sales, both for their movies and their theme parks, has dropped off a cliff. At the same time, the Daily Wire has announced that they're going to put $100 million over the course of the next couple of years into children's programming. And their business is exploding. And they're quite candid about it. As long as Disney wants to alienate their customers, Daily Wire is more than happy to make money off of that. So eventually, if Disney doesn't correct its problem, other companies are going to step in and take their customers away from them, and the market will correct it. Why are companies doing this? I have no idea. All I can say is their leadership has become so attuned to the narrative that they don't understand the real values of their customers. And they will pay a price for that, because if they're going to create a vacuum, someone will step in.
I think that's a great place to stop for a second break and think about that. Let's come back. You're living in solution. Welcome back to Living Solution. We're speaking with Mr. John Green. And before the break, I think we were really kind of teasing into why these corporate entities do what they do. Maybe one of the things that we haven't considered is the money that's pumped in by the government. Look at the college situation. They have endowments that are bigger than most countries, and the government still gives them money for student aid and all these financial issues. And despite that, the price of college education has gone through the roof. Now they're losing students because of their vaccine mandates, all sorts of things. And yet, nothing, I mean, I think at some point it'll have to change because the government, I don't think, is going to be able to support everything like it has been in the past because of our economic woes. But do you think that's what's been keeping these things alive, corporate welfare?
Uh, that and the fact that when the government gives you money, it comes with strings. You know, I spent a great many years working in the defense industry, and it became a contractual requirement for us to have diversity programs to even be allowed to compete for government contracts. So in that environment, it almost becomes irrelevant whether it's good for the company or not. It's something you have to do, or your customers telling you they won't buy your product. So those same kind of strings occur when the government gives money to colleges and universities, when they give grants to state and local governments. It always comes with strings, and it's never free money.
And it ends up costing everybody more in the long run, frankly.
Sure. I mean, the thing that nobody seems to understand is none of that money is free. The government has to take it away from us before they give it to us. Has it occurred to the vast majority of Americans that it's a physical impossibility for the government to take money away from us in taxes and then give us the same amount of money back in gifts, whether that's grants to state and local government, whether that's university endowments, whether that's welfare. No, the fact of the matter is they take and they give back less because they have a huge administrative burden. So
Hmm.
they make it sound like they're giving us a stimulus check, but what they're first doing is picking our pocket, taking their cut off the top, and then giving us a little bit of it back and telling us we should be thankful for it. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think we're also forgetting the cronies that are also hangers on with this, the
Oh,
friends of,
yeah.
right? So you've got Alec, that whatever that is, marketing group, and it's infiltrated every city, every state, and that's big business, that's big pharma, that's all of these things that are making policy, that they all get to take a feed at the trough, and by the time you get your penny left of the money that they gave you, it's not helping anybody.
Yeah. I mean, to me, one of the perfect examples of crony capitalism is federal subsidies for the ethanol industry. So, in the name of renewable energy, we provide government subsidies to farmers and refiners to manufacture ethanol to be mixed with our gasoline. The problem is, there was a study done probably 10 years ago which showed that ethanol has about 3/4 of the energy of a gallon of gasoline, but it takes 1.25 gallons of gasoline to produce every gallon of ethanol. So we are burning more gas to create ethanol, which then replaces gasoline at a lower energy rate than what the gasoline is worth. And we say we're financing renewable energy that way. It's just another example of the government deciding that one industry is more worthy than another and absolutely throwing money down a drain to make it work.
This sounds very eerily familiar with the electric car industry. You know how these electric batteries are tearing up the environment to make them.
Oh,
After they're
sure.
dead, they're not usable. Where are we going to put these things? And you need gasoline to run the electric pumps, whatever. I mean, it just doesn't even make somebody's making money on this movement. And you just described, I guess that was the first iteration with the ethanol industry. Now we've got electric cars, etc. And I don't own one, but I have heard that the people who got flooded out in Florida, their cars are totaled because when the water, invaded the bottom of the car, it's totally useless. What kind of industry is this where you have to total your car, get rid of it? You can't afford to buy, to replace the battery. It's like thousands of dollars. Who's supposed to be able to afford this? Or is everybody just supposed to be using public transportation while a set few get to be mobile?
Well, yeah, I mean the electric car industry is another perfect example of the government placing its fingers on the scales of commerce and making something completely irrational happen. The reality is that electricity is not an energy source; it's a transmission source. Electric cars don't run on electricity; they use electricity as an intermediate transfer device. They run on coal, fuel oil, natural gas, and nuclear energy, which provides the electricity. So, I like to make fun of people that drive electric cars and point out that those are coal powered cars. In the engineering world, we like to talk about the total life cycle cost of, of our products because that's how you assess the true cost of a product. What we're not hearing on electric cars is what is the environmental impact of manufacturing those batteries? And it's huge. What's the environmental impact of disposing of those batteries? That's even bigger. But every single battery that's made will eventually have to be thrown away somehow. And disposing of them is a gigantic expense. The other thing we're not talking about is the danger of those batteries. It was really interesting after this most recent hurricane went through in Florida. There was an advisory issued to people that had lithium batteries in their home to take the lithium batteries outside, place them in a field away from anything else, and then stay away from them until they could be properly disposed of because they could burst into flames at any time. So that's the kind of electric cars we want to move to.
Actually, there was a story of someone who had the car was in the garage and it ignited and the house burned down.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is they never talk about the safety aspect of anything. It's always push, push, push. This is we know what's best for you. I don't care what that is. If it's education with No Child Left Behind, or if it's the public health industry, you name it. It's somebody, and it's always somebody who knows the least, in my opinion, who's making these pronouncements. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah. Because the people that are making those pronouncements are the politicians. What exactly are they experts at? I'm yet to find anything. Were they experts at controlling the spread of COVID? I don't think so. Now they want to be experts on lithium batteries and electric cars. But what we're finding out is that they are completely wrong in their assessment of the economics of the whole thing. That sustainable energy has not reached a point scientifically where it can replace fossil fuels for power generation. Yet the government wants to place its finger on the scale and control how we purchase that stuff. The fact of the matter is the only you know, it is entirely possible that sometime in the future sustainable energy might be a viable alternative, but we will only know that if the market is allowed to verify that it's economically feasible without government subsidies. And that's what the government is unwilling to do.
Well, we tried this in 2000, the last administration before last, where they were pouring money into these startup companies. I think maybe all of them went bankrupt. I don't think anybody
Solyndra,
survived because
yeah,
yeah,
Solyndra
anybody.
is one of them,
Oh,
right? Hundreds of millions of dollars went into the manufacture of solar panels, which they couldn't sell because they were too expensive and inefficient for the amount of energy they generated.
or the or the energy grid. What in Texas? Because they were depending on wind power as well. It wasn't enough, and they were short an energy shortfall. I mean, this is I don't have a problem with it, but why does it have to be so catastrophic? Why can't it just come in a natural way where you change over as the capacity is there? It just seems like you're cutting your nose off to spite your face to, I don't know, prove a point or make money or who knows, both.
Yeah, it's not that solar and wind don't have their place, but when the government dictates how they're used, you see irrational things happening. So yeah, Texas had a collapse of the grid. So did Minnesota a few years ago, where the temperature dipped so low that the wind turbines couldn't work anymore. The reality is, if you let the market determine an appropriate application of technology, the market will do a cost benefit analysis and use those technologies where they're appropriate. When the government steps in and mandates that they be used, then irrational things start to happen. One study I saw in Minnesota showed that anytime over 15% of the power grid is devoted to renewable sources like wind and solar, the power grid becomes unstable and you start having rolling blackouts. Did
But
did
that's
the government bother to do that analysis before they started stipulating, like for instance in California, that they were going to switch completely to renewable energy? No, absolutely not. They just did it because it sounded good.
But you know what'll happen though, when things fall apart and you do get those rolling blackouts, then it's going to be because of global warming. Well, on that note, let's take our last break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Mr. John Green, and you can read his the article that we referred to at the beginning of the show. It's called The Diversity Industry Has Turned the Clock Back to 1960, and you can read it on American Free News Network. And, I want to revisit this again because it just seems so defeating that we've moved. There's generations who know that this is not, we haven't moved back to the 1960s, that they were living in, my parents, my mom lived in a Jim Crow situation when she was alive, and it was nothing. It completely reversed. And how, if she were alive right now, I think she'd actually be quite appalled for someone to say that we haven't moved at all, that this is the most racist society. And I mean, it's just all the hyperbole that goes on while these same people are enjoying the benefits of what people did, what their ancestors, what the previous generation did, white and black. People have moved forward. And that's something that they just seem to be absolutely resistant to, with no hint of, I don't know. My question is, are these natural? Are they being driven by what government, as follow the money? The money is being spent on creating and nurturing uh, feeling of dissent and feeling of victimhood. You're getting rewarded for it now, whether that's you're getting a job, you're getting a place in a field that is historically underrepresented. You can get all sorts of things based on your victim status. It just seems so defeat. You can't run a society like that. I mean, there's no way. No, it's actually tragic, and it's it's racist and sexist and everything else because in general, everybody's an individual. If you work and you gain skills, and you should be able to do whatever you're big enough to do. But that doesn't seem to be the way this is working. It's, let's just skip some steps and jury rig the system, and everything should work out. And if it doesn't, it's going to be someone else's fault, or it's self fulfilling. This unfolding, aside from the typical angst and societal upheaval, what's going to happen when we talk about being in a profession where this, and it's threaded through society? I'm seeing that a lot in all sorts of professional fields.
Problem with that is we can't overcome ignorance if we can't talk candidly. And there may be some uncomfortable truths that we need to talk about also that we can't get to because we're not being candid.
Well, I mean, I think it needs self-examination too, and not the ability to not have everybody want everybody to like you, because that's also puts you in a position where you're self-censoring. And that's, if you can't be true to who you are or speak your truth, nobody can be honest with each other, can they?
True. And it's not just self-censoring. It's, I mean, you can be canceled by forces outside your control if you say the wrong thing now. I mean, you think about it, and if you're a public figure and you say the wrong thing, you can be kicked off of Twitter, off of Facebook. They can threaten your livelihood by contacting your corporate leadership and demanding your termination. We have college professors that have lost their jobs because they spoke their minds. And that's an absolutely toxic environment when we want to have a competition for ideas.
Well, at some point, something has to give. Either we continue to kowtow to it, or we stand our ground and speak truth to power. I still believe this is a minority of the country who feel this way. They get a megaphone, they get a platform, and they get backup from this corporate structure that somehow stands to gain from it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a minority, but they have outsized power right now. And until more Americans stand up and say, political correctness is nonsense, we need to speak our minds regardless of whether somebody gets their feelings hurt. We need to talk about the truth, even if that's uncomfortable to talk about. And we have to challenge the paradigms that have been in place over the course of the past 50 years, which are telling us that certain things are driving society when we know the truth is something entirely different.
Maybe it comes down to everybody having a self-worth, not having it come from outside, but from within, and stop identifying as a group or a tribe and as an individual with something to offer, with value intrinsic in who you are breathing on this earth, as opposed to what you look like, what your skin color is, which is totally arbitrary and superimposed. Maybe that would be the step that we need to make in order to take a different direction.
That's an important step, and that is really getting at what are the commonalities that we all share as opposed to our differences.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you get to the point where you don't feel like everybody has to like you, then you can speak truth. But we still have forces in our society that are stifling that, because the left will come after your job, and they will come after your personal finances if you say the wrong thing. And that's a very unfortunate thing, but that's the level of censorship that we have in this country right now. And it's going to take an awful lot of people saying, I'm willing to stand up and take personal risk to say what's true. And when enough people do that, then we'll start to overcome these forces of political correctness that are stifling free speech right now.
I hope that people listen to this and start to really examine it, because it's not making us a happy society. It's making us vulnerable, and it's making us ill, and it's damaging our children. I mean, it's just not like it's a positive thing. And the people who are pronouncing this are the ones that are really making out like bandits, in terms of their power, their megaphone and money that they're making off of this. I always say follow the money, and if it doesn't serve you, then you really do need to take a step back from it.
Yeah, I agree completely. How many mansions does Patrice Cullors have now?
What, 3, isn't it?
3 or 4? I'm not sure.
A ton.
Yeah, it's all about the money. It really is.
And using pain and anger and fear, and in some instances, people who don't want to control their destiny, right? It's about personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you want to see that to somebody, you're going to be a victim, not in the classic sense, not because of who you are, what you are, whatever, but because you let them run the show. And then you feel bad about yourself on top of it. Something has to stop. And I'm so happy that you came on the show today, because just hearing a different perspective from somebody who, it's not emotional, it's just looking at the bigger picture, and something's not right. And hopefully we were able to examine that in a different, and with a different energy. So I want to thank you so much for coming on. Once again, how can people read your blogs and find and follow you?
I write on 3 different sites primarily. American Thinker, the American Free News Network, which is the URL for that is afnn.us, and also for the Blue State Conservative. That's all one word.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Green, I want to thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you, and you're welcome anytime. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for living in the solution.
Revolutionary Talk for Revolutionary Times. Liberty Talk FM.